Today's guest is Joe Sobczak. He comes with a lengthy background in aviation, from the light singles to the heavy 747 400s and a myriad of other aircraft in between that. And we're going to talk about that. And Joe, first off, welcome to the Flying Dutchman podcast.
Well, thank you, Dutch. Appreciate the opportunity to chat with you.
Yeah, and I appreciate that background. That's your T-34, isn't it?
It is. Yeah, I co-own it, in fact, but
Mm-hmm.
we've had that airplane for about 5 years and had a somewhat similar T-34 for a few years before we got that one.
Oh, okay. They're wonderful aircraft. I've heard from other people that own them. And Julie Clark, she flies a T-34.
She flies a T-34. She's been up here to see this one,
Oh,
and
has she?
she pops in from time to time.
Oh, that's nice. I've met her at air shows, and she's a very personable person. I enjoyed meeting
Yeah.
her. The how what I'm always curious about is uh, you have a long career in aviation. It started in the Air Force.
Well, if you go back far enough, it started at San Jose Municipal Airport before it was called San Jose International Airport,
Uh-huh.
where I first learned how to fly.
And how old were you when you did that?
I started learning when I was 16. I was a student pilot at 16 and then was able to get my private pilot license when I turned 17. It was 17th birthday.
Did you have a long-term goal when you were getting your private pilot's license, or you just wanted to fly the valley?
I think you would probably call it a long-term goal. It wasn't terribly specific at the time. You know, I knew when I first got the bug to fly, I knew I wanted to fly, and uh, at 16, you're not maybe necessarily ironing out a career line by line, but certainly had an idea that's what I wanted to do, and it didn't take very long before I realized that I did want to make a career out of it.
And what did you do after you had your license? You thought, I want to do this as a career. Did you set your sights on the military or the heavy airliner?
Yeah, to back up just a little bit from even getting my license, the first exposure that I had to flying was with my uncle. Uncle Henry was a fighter pilot in World War II.
Oh,
He flew P-51s and P-47s,
mm,
and Uncle Henry lived in Arizona, so I didn't see him all the time, but I did have an opportunity to go visit my cousins and aunt and uncle there in Arizona when I was in high school. I was probably about 15 or 16 years old. And Uncle Henry took me flying in a Cessna Cardinal. And it didn't take very much for the bug to bite. You know, I loved it
uh-huh.
and never looked back. Uh, Uncle Henry was pretty inspirational. Anyway, it was really fun to talk about him and his exploits in World War II.
I
And
bet.
so I kind of had a bug for not only aviation but military aviation really from the beginning. So after Uncle Henry got me interested in aviation, I joined the Civil Air Patrol.
Mm,
That was at San Jose. They drilled at San Jose Reed Hillview Airport, and they still do. And the Civil Air Patrol had a program that allowed cadets to take. It wasn't actually a Civil Air Patrol program. It was a flight school at San Jose Airport. It had a program where they would provide ground school at no charge to Civil Air Patrol cadets. So when I heard about that, I raced over to San Jose Airport, signed up for ground school, and I was still 16, so I couldn't really fly. I was first of all, I didn't really have a job, and it did cost money to fly. Uh, and you have to be 17 to get a pilot license in a engine-driven airplane anyway.
mm-hmm.
And so anyway, I went to the flight school and was enthusiastic and excelled and thrived in the ground school program. I got to know the people at the school, and they offered me a job working with the mechanics on the flight line. So I helped the mechanics and cleaned airplanes and between rentals and got some exposure around the airport. And since I was working there, I think they paid me $2 an hour. And once I started making enough money, I started taking flying lessons with them there, and had a chance to fly with it was it was called a Part 141 school, so it was an approved FAA approved school, which you would typically say is among the best. It was a very good school, So it was a good background in aviation. I kept in touch with my flight instructor up until he passed away a year ago. But Bill Osborne was my instructor, and he was an excellent instructor and gave me a good start in flying. And then when my 17th birthday came around, I was able to take my private pilot check ride and go from there. And then from there I went to school at Arizona State. So the introduction to the military was as a senior in high school. I was applying for colleges, and I also applied for an Air Force ROTC scholarship. At the time, an Air Force ROTC scholarship, a 4-year scholarship, was predicated upon having a slot for pilot training, or being kind of pre-approved to get into pilot training in the Air Force. Anyway, I applied for the scholarship, was awarded the scholarship, and went to school for 4 years, well, 5 years really, at Arizona State on the Air Force ROTC scholarship. Along the way, I was able to get my commercial pilot license and certified flight instructor rating. So I did some instructing in school to make a little bit of money, and continue to build my skill and proficiency.
Yes. Were you a patient instructor?
Sometimes.
You didn't bring a car antenna with you, and
no. But I guess I was fairly selective with my students. They were all pretty good. And the last student I had was my last two students were my son and my daughter. I got my son all the way through his private pilot license, and so he flies for fun. My daughter, I got as far as solo, and because of limitations with my job and airplane availability after she soloed, I handed her off to another instructor who's a friend of ours, and now she's a pilot with Southwest Airlines. So
very good.
She made flying her career.
Oh, very good, very good. And you got your Air Force ROTC, didn't you? That you applied for?
Got an Air Force ROTC scholarship. I have this noted down. If there's anyone out there looking for schools, there are some really good aviation schools. If you got the time, I'll kind of go through some of them around here. Not too far from you is the Sacramento City College. I have a friend who's in the A&P program there, airframe and power plant mechanics license program. It's a terrific school. The guy that runs, his name is Kevin. They have a 100% pass rate if you go through their course. If you successfully complete the course there at Sac City College, they have a 100% success rate passing the FAA practical exam for aircraft mechanics. So it's a good way to start.
It's a very desirable school.
I've got another friend who's one of my neighbors up here. He's at about the same stage. He's at Ridley College down near Fresno, also in an A&P program. And he's down there thriving. He just bought himself an airplane for $7,500, a Cessna 150. So he's launching his flying career with his own airplane now. With his dad's help, who's also an A&P mechanic, they got the airplane flying, did an annual inspection, and they're getting it fixed up. So
that's the way to do it.
He's gotten into flying very economically.
Yeah.
When I was looking to start my education, I was looking at San Jose State University, where my dad was a teacher there in the physical education department. He was friends with Tom Leonard, who was an icon there as head of the aviation department. And I was accepted at San Jose State. However, they only had a 2-year Air Force ROTC program, and I needed to find a school with a 4-year Air Force ROTC program if I was awarded a 4-year scholarship. Since I ultimately did get the 4-year scholarship, ended up going to Arizona State University, which full circle here is where, close to where my Uncle Henry lived in Scottsdale. So I had a chance to get to know Uncle Henry and my cousins and aunt and cousins pretty well while I was going to school there, since I was there for 4 years.
Your uncle probably thought this is pretty cool.
Yeah, we had a good time. We had a lot of fun while I was there.
Yeah.
Uncle Henry was quite the character. We had a lot of interesting exploits.
You know what? Maybe offline sometime we'll talk about that.
Yeah, you bet.
So you graduate, and then you end up going to OCS.
So our Air Force ROTC is a commissioning program. So I was commissioned when I graduated. I was commissioned a second lieutenant in the U.S. Air Force. This was 1975, and it was at the, just at the end of the Vietnam War. So the Air Force really didn't need pilots.
Hmm.
And as it turned out, I was pretty fortunate to even keep my pilot training slot in the Air Force because of the lack of need for pilots at that point, unless for the ROTC students and cadets, unless you were a distinguished graduate from the ROTC program, you lost your pilot training slot. There was an opportunity for some. I know some that were able to recompete and eventually get into pilot training, but for the most part, it was pared down quite a bit. And I also knew that I was going to be uh, delayed getting into pilot training because of that. They just weren't, they cut back quite a bit on the pilot training at that point. And I stayed at school and was able to get a master's degree at Arizona State before I finished up.
Mm.
Then I went from Arizona State University in Tempe, Arizona, all the way across the valley to Williams Air Force Base near Chandler, Arizona, for pilot training. And when I finished pilot training, went back across the valley to Luke Air Force Base over on the other side of the Valley of the Sun near Glendale, Arizona, for F-15 transition training.
Okay, let's take a pause there because you went to Williams to fly the T-37 and the T-38 both.
Yes, so it's about a year-long program, Air Force pilot training. The first half is in the T-37. The T-37 was a lot of fun. It's I was used to flying light airplanes, and the T-37 was like kind of like a heavy jet-powered light airplane. It
And
was
it is Cessna that built it too, isn't it?
Cessna made it. Yeah, it was a nice flying airplane. I really enjoyed it. It was a lot of fun to fly. That program lasted about half of the pilot training course, about 6 months, and then from there you transition to the T-38, which is still in use today.
Yeah.
And the T-38, you get advanced formation flying, more instrument flying, and it's a little bit of a lead-in. Now they use it today exclusively as a lead-in for future fighter pilots.
Mm-hmm.
At the time, all pilots went through pilot training, flew the T-38.
Oh, that's true. And you got the F-15 slot. You must have scored very well or something because that especially at that time, the F-15s were the premier Air Force fighter jet coming off the assembly line.
It was, yeah, it was. I was pretty lucky. We about at that time, maybe the F-15 had only been assigned, or F-15 assignments had only been offered for maybe 6 months for new pilot training graduates because the F-15 was new.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's 1970. So yeah, 1975. I think is when the F-15 first came to Luke Air Force Base, the very first one. Actually, I remember being there. President Gerald Ford was there to christen the airplane when the first F-15 arrived, and the program, was ramping up. But it was a fairly slow ramp up because they were just building the airplanes, and there weren't that many F-15 assignments. So there's about one F-15 assignment for every other pilot training class.
Mm-hmm.
One of my classmates was a former backseater, weapon systems operator, an F-4 backseater at a time in Vietnam. And the two of us got to be pretty good friends. He was a great leader and a great mentor in the class because he was a captain. He'd been in the Air Force for a few years, and the rest of us were all lieutenants, new to the Air Force. He did real well in the program, and I did real well in the program, and there was a little bit of tension because when the assignments came up, everybody knew that, first of all, F-15 assignments were not a sure thing at all. There was maybe one every other class, and the two of us were certainly contenders for the F-15. And so for the first time ever, as it turned out, our class was awarded two F-15 assignments.
Oh.
And Jim and I, Wiz was his call sign. Wiz and I both ended up going to Bitburg flying the F-15.
Oh, what a great duty station.
Yeah.
You were the Bulldogs.
The 5-2, we were the 525 Tactical Fighter Squadron, the Bulldogs.
Yeah. Yeah. But
well, I was actually Jim was I was in the Bulldogs. He was in the 53rd, which was a different squadron there, but we were both at Bitburg. So
let's just say that what it is that they put those at Bitburg for a reason because the Warsaw Pact was I don't know what the flying time would be, but you guys were point defense.
It was pretty close. We weren't more than probably from the time the bell rang, we were maybe 10 minutes from the border back when
Wow.
East and West Germany were divided. Uh,
You you must have been impressed because they trained you obviously in the F-15B perhaps back then. Maybe the D, I don't know, but
It was, yeah, we had the A and B model airplane.
the
So the training starts at the B model, the two-seat version.
mhm.
And that's kind of just sort of a check out on the airplane that basically taking off and landing is pretty much what you learn. And the F-15 is extremely easy to fly as far as just flying an airplane. So if you've graduated from pilot training with a T-38, they could have just given you a briefing and given you the airplane. It just wasn't that difficult to
Really?
fly. And so most of the training was in the A model with an instructor pilot flying as a safety chase or an instructor chase in another airplane.
Mm-hmm. But I could imagine if they did a full afterburner takeoff just to show you what it can do in the vertical, that because it had a 1-to-1 thrust ratio.
If it was sea level, it was a lightweight airplane. It didn't have external tanks or any kind of weapons loaded. It had in excess of 1-to-1. I think the engines, I think, in full afterburner put out somewhere in the combined around 50,000 pounds of thrust, and
Oh my goodness.
the airplane without any external stores, but full fuel is like 42,000. So at sea level on takeoff, it would go pretty good. I can jump ahead to another interesting takeoff story if you want to hear it. But
Yes.
this was 20 years later when I was flying for Lockheed Martin at Edwards Air Force Base, and I had the opportunity to do the first flight on an F-16 powered with a Pratt and Whitney F-100 PW229 engine, which was uh, about a 30,000 pound thrust engine, so it had more thrust. The F-15 and F-16 thrust to weight ratio is similar. Only
Mm-hmm.
one engine, but the airplane weighed half as much, so
Mm-hmm.
the performance was comparable. And I remember getting ready to do the takeoff on this thing because I wanted an afterburner takeoff, and I wasn't going to argue with that. It was going to be a lot of fun. So we were doing this at Edwards Air Force Base, and at Edwards, there's a 15,000-foot runway that also has 1,000-foot overruns on either end. So it's 17,000 feet of pavement. And then at the east end, it transitions to the dry lake bed. So if the lake bed's dry, which it was at the time, you got about another 7 miles of overrun and actually usable runway beyond the runway. So you're taking off towards the lake bed just as a safety precaution. It's first flight on this engine airframe combination. So it's one of the mitigating safety procedures was to take off towards the lake bed. But it's going to be an afterburner takeoff, and I'm thinking this thing is going to be lightweight. We had no external tanks on the airplane. It was a clean jet, as we call it. No external tanks or stores of any kind.
Two-seater,
Single seat,
single seat.
single seat airplane. Um, and so in my mind, I'm thinking we're going to accelerate pretty quickly. So as soon as I get into full afterburner, I got to think about pulling back on the stick and rotating the airplane for takeoff because if I go wait and watch the airspeed, I'm probably going to be behind it, because of the fast acceleration. So I'm thinking this through, and I'm thinking as soon as I get the airplane rotated, it's going to want to fly. So I got to be reaching for the gear handle to get the landing gear up so I don't overspeed the landing gear,
Mhm.
which is kind of hard to do. It's 400 knots, but we're going to be accelerating pretty quick. And that's exactly what happened. Push the throttle up, hit afterburner, immediately started to pull back on the stick to get the nose up so the airplane would fly. And then as soon as I started to pull on the nose, reach for the landing gear handle and put the gear handle up. And that happened pretty quick. Power, stick, gear. And I was pretty conscious of the takeoff roll because I knew it was going to be short. So I was watching the markers and the runway lights, and the takeoff roll was about 600 feet. So it's a
Wow.
pretty spirited takeoff.
That's
Which
amazing, huh?
in previous fighters, the F4 and other similar fighters, you normally just took off in afterburner routinely because they didn't have as much thrust to weight ratio,
Mm-hmm.
especially if you had external tanks or something like that on the airplane. The F-15, operationally, normally we just took off in military power, full power without using the afterburner because you just didn't need it.
And you're flying the F-15, and you have in Europe you have a wonderful opportunity for dissimilar air combat against other NATO nations that fly all these vast array of airframes. that we don't seem to have anymore. There's pretty, commonality. But um, did you have any spirited mock dogfights with any particular country that you could share?
But I call it spirited because the F-15 was brand new. And an F-15, even if you're a lousy pilot, you're still the king of the hill because the airplane just was so capable.
Mm-hmm.
And the NATO countries were still flying the F-104 and the F-4. So unless they vastly outnumbered us, it would have been embarrassing not to win a dogfight.
Oh,
We did have a chance to fly quite a bit against the U.S. Air Force aggressor squadron. They flew the
oh,
F-5
out of
aggressors
Alconbury or
out
something.
of Hockenberry. So
Yeah.
and it was fun for us because most of the time the aggressors would deploy to the base. For example, Ramstein was when I was at Ramstein had F-4Es, and the aggressors would normally deploy to Ramstein because the F-4 was kind of cumbersome airplane to deploy. You had to bring ground carts, and they required a lot of maintenance between flights. The F-15 was like flying my Cherokee. You just go fire it up, start it, put gas in it, and fly it again. It had its own internal starting capability, and we
Mm-hmm.
didn't have to repack a parachute every time we flew. So because the aggressors are spending all this time on the road to give them a break, and because they had good airspace for training, we always deployed to Alconbury to fly against the aggressors. And I was a bachelor at the time, and so I was
Oh,
always volunteering to go over there. And typically by about Thanksgiving, we met all of our training requirements. So the guys who had families back in Bitburg would stay there, and we all volunteered. All the bachelors volunteered to go to Alconbury. So we spent a lot of time between about November and December. Spent a lot of time in Alconbury getting extra air-to-air training with the aggressors, and they were good. And
yeah.
they would challenge us, even when the F5 doesn't perform quite as well as an F-15 does. They could simulate enemy tactics and force us to uh, to react accordingly in order to.
Uh-huh.
A lot of times they got numbers, so we'd
Yeah.
have to take that into account.
What's crazy is even now the F5 is still performing in the aggressive role.
Yeah, yeah, it's a terrific airplane. And so the disadvantage we had in the F-15, the F-15 is a pretty big airplane. It was designed and built around I think it was called the APG-63 radar. Could be wrong on the radar designation, but it was a big radar, and its superpower at the time really was the fact that it had this phenomenal radar. It went on, in fact, to shoot down a satellite. It's the only airplane that's ever shot down a satellite, the
Well,
ASAT program at Edwards.
yeah. Didn't they have some tactic called the Eagle Wall where they would have a combat spread, but it was even and everybody had their radars going and they just designate the target who got what target? Is that something I'm not
Yeah,
sure?
that
I
was
think
kind of
it
that was
is.
a typical tag.
Yeah.
Combat. It's been, I think, in World War II they call it combat spread.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, we just called it a line abreast. It was about a
Yep.
mile, two airplanes about a mile from each other. And it was
Mm-hmm.
pretty easy to see the other airplane if the weather's above the clouds and the weather's okay. But you don't want to get close together because if your adversary sneaks up behind you, he
Oh,
can shoot at both of you. But it works out to if you're sitting about a mile line abreast, you can check your wingman and look and see if anybody's rolling in behind them
yeah.
and react accordingly before the guy has a chance to shoot at your wingman.
And you had look down, shoot down capability or something
Yeah,
like that?
yeah, it had Doppler radar that would notch the ground return so you could look down. Radar works just fine looking down.
Oh, that's great. And what's so funny is we're talking about all these wonderful capabilities, but the F-15 had steam gauges.
Oh yeah, at least the A model did. I never flew the C model or the D model, but the F-15 A model looked
Yeah,
probably not a whole lot different than well, I'd say with Cessna 172 is maybe a little
that's
nicer instrumentation,
yeah.
but
It
it was
probably
basically round gauges.
gave you some San Jose flashbacks looking at that dash.
Yeah, you didn't have to learn too much new.
Right. Well, that must have been pretty cool though when you go fly somewhere and you're bringing the F-15. And as a young kid with my bicycle hanging on the fences at the Mather Air Force Base, it was to have something come in other than a 52, which I love. But yeah, and I know they're just burning off fuel, but we were convinced they were giving us our own air show for them keep coming back and coming back. But when I got older, I realized they were just getting light so they can land. They came in with a lot of weight, but I imagine you probably, especially in England, they always have a crowd at the fences for
Okay.
airplanes. I'm sure you came in and looked over and I don't know, tapped the burner, maybe. I don't know, but
Might have
when yeah, when your time is up in Bitburg, now it's coming back to the world, as we used to say when I was in Germany, but come back to States. Is Where did you go? Did you stay in the Eagle, or did you end up being put somewhere else, or wanted to go somewhere else?
I stayed in F-15 and went from Bitburg to Warner Robins uh, Air Force Base in Georgia. The Warner Robins Air Logistics Center is where the F-15 and at the time the C-130 and C-141 were maintained. So that's where the heavy maintenance is. So when the
Mm-hmm.
airplanes go in for overhaul, they go to Robins Air Force Base. So I was there as a they call us flight test pilot, and we did all of the flight tests when the airplanes came out of overhaul.
That kind of that's going to kind of segue into where we're going with your career, isn't it?
It exactly did, yeah.
What
Spent
is
about spent about
so
a year and a
when
half there, and then was accepted to the test pilot school at Edwards Air Force Base
Wow.
after that assignment.
But we're going to go there real quick. But while we're still at Warner Robins, one of your responsibilities was to take a jet that had just been depoted, inspected, repaired as necessary, and maybe even repainted. I don't know. But and now you got to take it out there and put it through its paces, didn't you?
Yeah, we had a profile that we flew. As I recall, the F-15, it was about an hour, maybe an hour and a half profile, and
Mm-hmm.
it included a mock run where we get the airplane up to Mach 2 to make
Oh,
sure all the systems were working properly, and working like they were supposed to. It involves avionics, checking the avionics and the engines, and uh, shut down the engines and restart them to make sure that worked okay.
yeah, as
It was
advertised.
a pretty good shakedown of the airplane.
I bet. But speaking of the airplane, before we leave Warner Robins, when the canopy is raised on the F-15, there's like a trunk behind the ejection seat. I mean, you could put things back there, I guess, with some limitations because there is black boxes back there, if I remember right, looking in there. But did you ever transport? I know that one F-15 brought a bunch of shrimp from somewhere, and it stayed in the cockpit and spoiled and
Yeah,
stunk.
I wasn't exactly involved in that, but that was back in Bitburg.
Oh,
The
okay.
airplane actually got the nickname the Shrimp Boat, and we had a exercise up in Bodo, Norway. This was actually before I got to Bitburg, just before I got there,
Mm-hmm.
and there and the F just to kind of back up a little bit, the
Yeah.
F-15B model, which has two seats, carries exactly the same fuel as an A model, and the only real difference is they put the extra seat in the back and have a canopy that's big enough to, for the back seater, and of course all the
Oh,
life support stuff. So the B model and the A model are almost the same airplane,
I did not
um,
know that.
which was kind of nice for training because you didn't, unlike the F-16 where the back seater displaces some fuel, in the F-15 you had the same fuel load, so training is the same. But in the A model, where there was no seat in the back at the time that I was flying the F-15, they didn't have all the electronic countermeasures equipment fully developed for the airplane.
Mm-hmm.
And that bay is where all that ECM equipment went. It was a big avionics bay,
Okay.
but it was empty because they didn't have the big electronic boxes back there.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a lot of space back there, uh, put stuff. So it was pretty standard to if we went someplace on a cross country flight and wanted to do some shopping to bring back stuff and had plenty of room to carry it in the back of the F-15, and we could throw our suitcase back there or whatever it is we were traveling with.
Golf clubs?
Golf clubs you could fit back there, yeah.
Oh
Yeah,
man.
I think a few of the pilots took golf clubs with them. They were going to go someplace and stay long enough to play golf.
Yeah. Well, that's pretty
But the
awesome.
shrimp boat story and I'm just kind of relaying the story because I wasn't there at the time, but they
Mm-hmm.
were coming back. I think it
No,
was from
please do.
Bodo, Norway, a deployment over there. Put a bunch of shrimp in the back, and the shrimp leaked out. And of course, the brine that the shrimp in is saltwater brine. Salt water is the enemy of airplanes and metal. So there's a lot
Whoa.
of corrosion, and the airplane was it was an expensive process to get the airplane fixed. And then as I recall, eventually that airplane crashed in an accident at some point.
Yeah.
Uh,
Well, that's too bad. But that I had heard of that story, but I didn't know any details other than that. So now we're at Warner Robins. You've applied. They didn't pick you. Is that how it worked for test pilot school at Edwards?
I probably had an application in for the test pilot school, and I was accepted, and so I left Warner Robins after a little over a year, and got to Edwards in uh, summer of 1980, so May or June of 1980.
Oh, well, what an exciting time because you still had probably, in the mid 70s, you had the 15, 16, the A-10. You had some of the things from Vietnam, the pave pack, pave ways, pave spikes, all these things that were coming up.
There was a lot of stuff going on. I'm sort of
Yeah.
misspoke. 81, June of 81 is when they started, not 80. Yeah,
Oh,
it was Bitburg until 80, and then Warner Robins till 81. But yeah, there's all kinds of stuff going on. It was also the big time for the NASA space shuttle program.
oh,
So saw a lot of shuttle landings while I was there.
yeah. You sent me a photograph of I'm not very familiar with civilian aircraft. A green is a Citabra or a green biplane next to a space shuttle.
You know, it was a Citabria, it was my plane, and I don't remember why I was parked next to the space shuttle, but I was able to do that, and I figured it'd be a good opportunity, good photo op next.
That's a good photo
That
op.
was a space shuttle Enterprise. Enterprise is the one that they dropped off a 747 for landing tests. And so
Okay.
that one never went into space, didn't have rocket motors in it, but it was
Oh.
designed, it was aerodynamically, it was a space shuttle.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and it was used to kind of prove the viability of that thing landing because it was basically a big glider.
Yeah. Yes. Now, while you were at Edwards, the test pilot and test pilot school, you're given a wide variety of aircraft to fly. And when you're given a manual, because they want you to fly a C-130, was it in depth, or was it like, here, you're a pilot, here's a book, go fly?
Pretty
Was
much
it?
the latter. The program at the test pilot school curriculum starts out with a performance. There's three phases: performance phase, where you learn to do flight testing for performance purposes, and then the flying qualities phase, where you learn about the flying qualities and how to assess flying qualities of an airplane, and then the systems phase, where we learn about systems like radars and electronics, countermeasures, and all that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So the first phase is a performance phase. I happened to be assigned to the F4, which I hadn't flown before, so I got checked out in the F4 and flew the F4 during the performance phase, where you learn how to do uh, tower flybys to calibrate altimeters and accelerations to learn, to assess performance, engine performance, that type of thing. But the first check ride that you take at the test pilot school as a student is in a C-130. I never flown a C-130.
Interesting.
There were only maybe one or two pilots that had flown C-130s that were student pilots in the test pilot school class, and they basically give you the flight manual and said, here's what you're going to have to do. Here's the flight manual. Uh, come out tomorrow. We'll fly the C-130, and it's your check ride. So,
Oh gosh, no pressure.
now, and they don't totally throw us to the wolves out there. They have an instructor pilot there, and they help get the airplane started and that type of thing. But you still have to figure out real quick how the airplane flies and how to do the performance
It's a busy
maneuvers.
looking cockpit.
Yeah, yeah, it's I wouldn't say it's spoon fed to you, but it's they don't expect you to be fully qualified aircraft commander the first time you fly it, but they
Yeah.
do expect you to be able to fly the airplane, hold airspeed, do steep turns and things like that. And that kind of speaks to the whole concept of the test pilot school. The test pilot school, when I was there, the curriculum F4 was one of the main airplanes they used in the curriculum, and the KC-135 was another one. Later on, it became the F-16, but they're not teaching you to be an F4 test pilot or an F-16 test pilot. They're teaching you to be an F-395 test pilot, something that hasn't built yet. So what they're really doing is teaching you how to teach yourself to fly and test an airplane. I flew the F-16, and I don't know that any of the photos I sent show it, but it had vertical canards on the front of the airplane,
I saw that.
and it had a digital flight control computer that could use those canards for various flight control functions. in an effort to evaluate their utility in a tactical environment. It did some kind of neat stuff because you could translate the airplane sideways. You could, if you're going to strafe a target or you're going to
For
fly
yaw,
airplane,
you mean? For
you could,
for yaw?
for yaw,
Flight?
well, yeah, except it wasn't yaw. It was really a lateral translation, I guess you'd call it, because we weren't really, see if I can training aid here someplace. We weren't really yawing the airplane. We were just translating sideways because you could put a side force on
Wow.
it and move the airplane sideways.
That's cool.
So the advantage was if you're strafing a target and you need to move the target or move the pipper to the left a little bit instead of moving, rolling up, rolling
Mhm.
back, stopping the roll, you just translate sideways. And actually it worked. But it was almost, I guess I'd call it a solution looking for a problem because it worked, but but lateral error is usually not that big of a problem in a fighter, whether it's for air to
Okay.
ground or even air to air. And the penalty was extra weight and complexity of the airplane that really cost you more than you were getting back in return. But they learned something from it. It's a technology integrator or demonstrator. It's not necessarily meant to be, this is the next airplane, but it's more like, let's go try it out and see how she works. Maybe we can use that later. And that actually happened. We did a program called Auto GCAS. And that was a really significant program. In 2018, it even won the Collier Trophy for uh, for the program.
Talk
Auto
about that.
GCAS stands for,
This is an exciting program.
yeah, Auto GCAS auto stands for Automated Ground Collision Avoidance System. And fundamentally what it's designed to do is detect the ground coming up, detect the pilot not reacting appropriately, the computer taking over the airplane and flying it away from the ground. Last I checked, the system in the F-16 program, the system had something like 13 saves, saved 13 airplanes and pilots.
There was a
Having,
high rate.
having lost a wingman in my squadron and seeing him do exactly that on
Yeah.
an exercise in Arizona, I was kind of motivated to make that system work.
When I went to their show at Edwards years ago, but the Edwards A7 and F, they were white with an orange mark. And what was your impression of the A7 Corsair?
Everybody liked the A7. It was, so I'm 6'4", and
Oh,
I got about 90 minutes in the A7 before I started getting cramped. It was not a terribly small cockpit, but it was just not ergonomically great. It was,
uh-huh.
so it had some real advantages. It didn't have an afterburner, so it didn't have a whole lot of excess thrust.
Yeah.
But as a sort of the silver lining there is that also didn't use a lot of fuel. So it had, of all the airplanes we flew at Edwards, of all the fighter-sized airplanes anyway, it had the best range and longest legs. We could stay up for a couple hours easy with the internal fuel. F4, you had about an hour.
Mm-hmm.
F-16, F-15, about the same.
And you mentioned that the reserves, were you a reserve test pilot or you did time in the reserves?
All of both. I had 10 years of active duty, and my active duty Air Force time ended at Edwards. And when I left active duty, I was in the Air Force Reserve, working at test ops and the F-16 test force and test pilot school. And then I had about a 3-year stint as a reservist, an operational F-16 pilot at Luke Air Force Base in Arizona. So I
Oh,
had 12 years of 10 years of active duty and then 12 years in the reserves, all of it flying, all of it was flying airplanes.
wow. And the test pilot went with you, that skill, that title went with you into the civilian world, correct?
When I ended my active duty career in
Mm-hmm.
1984, I joined General Dynamics Fort Worth Division, and I was assigned to Edwards Air Force Base. So I didn't really go anywhere. I just stayed
You
at
didn't
Edwards
have to pack the house up, did you?
yeah. So I went basically back to that. So I spent 2 years on active duty flying the F-16 at Edwards, doing F-16 flight tests.
Mm-hmm.
F-16, during the time I was there, we were developing the C model of the F-16.
Okay.
So digital flight controls were kind of a new thing. Although the time the C model didn't have digital flight controls, we put them in AFTI and they were going to get it shortly after that.
Mm-hmm.
And then some of the other C model avionics stuff. And then I did that for 2 years and I went back to the test pilot school as an instructor pilot. And after years as an instructor pilot, my active duty service commitment was over, and I separated from the active duty Air Force, but I stayed on as a reservist and went to work for General Dynamics, which it was a general. I was there for about 8 years as a civilian. About halfway through, General Dynamics Fort Worth division was sold to Lockheed Martin Corporation, who became the Lockheed Martin Tactical Aircraft Systems. Everything was the same except for the return address on my paycheck, but it was
Yeah.
basically just a different corporate umbrella. Same organization, same place building F-16s in the mile-long factory in Fort Worth.
Now, what is the Vista, the MATV Vista F-16? What is that?
So I'll work backwards. Right now, Vista is a program. It's a program called Variable In-Flight Stability Test Aircraft, and they built a programmable flight control computer in it that can simulate virtually any airplane you want. And so you get in that airplane, they can say, today it's going to fly like the space shuttle. And they can program in all of the flight characteristics of the space shuttle, and you as the pilot have to fly it just as if you're flying a space shuttle. You can say,
That's
today
cool.
Today's going to fly like a B-52, and everything's going to, the throttle, the thrust will react appropriately, the pitch and roll, everything will be just like as best they can model it, which is pretty darn close, like the airplane is trying to simulate.
Have you flown a B-52?
Yeah, I did it when I was at the test pilot school. I had a chance to fly a B-52 and air refuel from it. So,
that had to have been tough to refuel.
Yeah.
So, do you think the F-16 aggressors have that in them to simulate a MiG-29 or?
No, because for a couple of reasons they don't. The Vista airplane is one of a kind, and it's really a research and training airplane.
Okay.
And the aggressors don't need it, because you don't really, as an aggressor, you don't really need to simulate the airplane flying qualities. What you're really doing is simulating the enemy tactics.
Oh, okay.
And you can fly the tactics in almost any airplane. I guess about the only thing that would be handy as a aggressor is if you had a radar signature and a electronic signature of an enemy airplane, and they may well even have that, but be able to simulate that electronically somehow too.
And then one more thing on the F-16 is I remember seeing a delta winged F-16.
Yeah, I didn't fly that one, but that was being developed by Lockheed Martin as a entrant into the ground attack program, which eventually was won by by McDonnell Douglas and the F-15E ground attack airplane. It was a pretty good, from the people that flew it. It was a pretty good airplane. It had some capability, a lot of real carrying capability, very economical. It had some shortcomings that made it operationally challenging. That I don't know that Lockheed would have designed around those, but for the demonstration program, I think the F-15E won out, and it was pretty good. It was a good airplane. But back to Vista, Vista was that airframe, which is now Vista, was MATV, and you asked about MATV. MATV stood for multi-axis thrust vectoring. It was one of the last programs that I was involved with when I was with Lockheed Martin, and it was one of the most fun because it was a risk reduction program for the F-22, in that General Electric developed an engine with a thrust vectoring nozzle. And to look at it, you'd hardly know it was anything different than any other F-16 engine, F-100 engine, F-100-F-110 engine. But the nozzle, instead of just pointing straight back, could point in all directions based on how the flight control computer was programmed. So essentially, the engine became one of the flight controls. And the thing that was really interesting about it is you could fly the airplane and point it in any direction at any speed, because you were like flying a rocket. It was just a gimbaled nozzle. You could slow the airplane down to 100 knots and do a loop if you wanted to. From the outside, it would look kind of goofy. But oh yeah, we did all kinds of stuff.
Well, that's what made it fun for you, huh?
It was a lot of fun.
Abilities.
That program came around really, really quickly, and they built that thing. I was impressed with how successful it was for something that really kind of hadn't been done before, at least to my knowledge. We operated at fairly high altitudes, because if you lost the engine, you lost your flight controls. So, you had to be high enough to be able to recover the airplane if the engine quit. and so we couldn't, we weren't going to run around at, 4,000 or 5,000 feet. We were up about 15,000 feet or so.
Mm.
But even so, we could fly the airplane through its own exhaust basically, and the engine never once hiccuped. The engine was rock solid.
Yeah. We're leaving the reserves and you're going to work as a civilian doing what?
So I left, yeah. So well, I left Lockheed I was already in reserves. So I was in reserves
Okay.
when I was in reserves when I got to Lockheed. I was stayed in the reserves for 12 more years, so 4 years beyond Lockheed. But
Wow.
when I finished my time at Lockheed Martin, as one of my colleagues pointed out, peace broke out. We had to find something to do. And in retrospect, I could have stayed there because the F-20, F-22 and F-35 programs were viable programs and they kept on going. But a little fallback option here. And
Yeah.
one of my colleagues had a year or two earlier had joined United Airlines
Mm-hmm.
as a test pilot. And he called me up and said, "Hey, we are looking for another test pilot." So I left Lockheed Martin at Edwards and moved up to the Bay Area and spent 30 years flying airplanes.
30 years.
Yeah, for United.
How many hours do you have?
It was no, maybe 15,000 or something like that.
Wow.
Which doesn't sound like a lot if you talk to airline pilots, but it's pretty much 15,000 of hands on the wheel or hands on the stick and throttles. It's not watching pilots fly too much of it. But it was at the time when I started, we checked out pilots and what the manager sort of informally called the basic five. So I got to United Airlines, and the first airplane I checked out in was a 737. And they used that airplane for new test pilots because the training program was pretty much geared for new hire pilots.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not only learning the airplane, but also learning the way United Airlines does things. And like in my case, or most of our cases, we never flew airliners, so you kind of learn the way airliners are flown as opposed to the way fighters are flown, along with the airplane. So I flew the 737, and back then, I got to know the scheduler at the training center in Denver, and I was finished with the 737. I thought, I'd like to fly a 747. So I walked in and talked to her and said, "Hey, Pat, do you have any 747 courses available?" And she goes, "Oh, I got one starting in 2 weeks." I said, "Great, can you sign me up?" So I checked out the 737, then the 747, and then I like flying that airplane. So I went to the DC-10 and the 727 and 757, 767. The interesting thing, which is somewhat unusual for a career, is my very first flight at United Airlines in an airplane. I was the captain on the 747, and it was an interesting experience because we went through those courses one after the other and didn't really fly much between them. But I went through a 737, 747, DC-10, then had a little bit of a break between training. So I went up to San Francisco and they had a 747 to fly. So keep in mind, I just finished the DC-10 training, and the DC-10 and the 747 are very different airplanes. So I thought, all right, this is my chance to see if I've learned anything. So how can I handle being checked out in a whole bunch of new airplanes? And so I got out the manual and went through it in the 747. I was real comfortable. Went out to fly the airplane, got in it, started up, took off. Everything was going great. And after I took off, got the gear and the flaps up, it occurred to me the one thing I had that I kind of forgot to look at when I was kind of brushing up on it was how the autopilot worked.
Yeah. How the autopilot worked?
Yeah. And the DC-10 autopilot, the 747 autopilot are very, very different. And I'm flying with a manager who was my boss. I'm thinking, I can't really admit to him I don't know how the autopilot works. So, but it's also my first flight in the airplane, and my first flight at United. It was a 747 SP.
Were you, the little guy, the short guy?
Taking off from San Francisco. And so we're going right to like flight level 430 because the thing likes to go high, especially pretty light. And I'm thinking to myself, well, okay, if I get up to cruise altitude and level off, I'm pretty sure I can get the autopilot on the altitude hold. I think I know how that. I'm pretty confident I can do that. And it's my first flight in the airplane, so maybe hand flying all the way up to cruise wouldn't seem all that unusual, as opposed to turning on the autopilot and letting it fly. Right. So that's what I ended up doing. I flew up to 43,000, leveled off, got it trimmed up, turned on the autopilot, and autopilot came out.
You didn't notice a thing, did he?
Yep.
Yeah. Where were you going when you?
Las Vegas.
Oh, okay.
It was a storage place. I think the airplane was going into storage there or something. Of course, that wasn't quite the end of it because we got to Las Vegas. So the 747's got four engines. They're way out there, on the wing. And we're going into Las Vegas, and they like to set you up for like a really, really long straight-in final on the ILS in Las Vegas. So we're coming down the ILS, probably 20 miles out, and the airplane's crabbed about, I don't know, 10 or 15 degrees, and I looked at the boss and said, boy, it's a pretty good crosswind up here, Don. He said, well, if you want to adjust the throttles, you can fix some of that. And I go down, get the engines all synced up, and all of a sudden the airplane starts flying straight down the ILS. And I go, okay.
Oh, that's handy to know, isn't
it? Yeah.
And you've flown every Boeing jet, haven't you?
Well,
Starting with
yeah.
Did you like the 727?
I never 727 was nice. It was a very basic airplane. If you think the F-15 was a round dial airplane, the 727 is even a step back from that.
Wow.
It's just like flying my Cherokee, except it goes faster and higher.
Right. Yeah. And how many years were you with Boeing?
I was with United for 30 years. Yeah.
Wow. And what's interesting is at Fleet Week in San Francisco, United brings an airliner in at low altitude and circles around, and that was you flying those.
Yeah, back in I think 2007, might have been 2008. Alaska Airlines went to the Fleet Week Air Show producer and said, "Hey, we want to fly in your air show." And they said, "Okay, we can do that." Well, United had been a sponsor, had a chalet and stuff, and so United came back, and our boss, who was a former Marine, he was the senior vice president of maintenance and engineering at San Francisco. He said, well, "Wait a minute, we're a hometown airline, and we're not going to fly some little 737. We're going to do it at 747." So he called us up and said, "Hey, can you guys go fly the 747 in the air show?" And the guy that flew it, George and I had been volunteering for Family Day, which was held in conjunction with the Fleet Week Air Show.
Mm-hmm.
And George got in the back of a napkin and ginned up a little profile. We got together, went to the simulator, tried it out, and ended up flying the seven. That was the 747. I guess it was a 400. I don't know. Yeah, it was a 400. We started flying it. We did that through 2017 with varying levels of support from the companies. We did it once in a 737, once in a 757, whatever they give us to fly. 2017, the 747 was retired from active service at United, so that was our last 747 show, and then we since then have picked up and done it with a 777.
Wow, it must be kind of different sight picture being over the bay, and you came over the Golden Gate. I don't know what your altitude is, but I know you sent me a flight radar.
The company also did some pretty good videos that they posted online, YouTube videos. So if any of your viewers want to see what it looks like from the airplane, it's just a couple of 2-minute videos, and it has some pretty good views from basically what we could see out of the cockpit.
Mm-hmm.
Spliced in with or edited in with some pictures from the ground. So in 2 minutes, you get a pretty good idea what the whole thing was like.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to look for that. And you would take off from San Francisco International, head west over the Pacific, and just wait out there till you were called in to do your.
Yeah, we typically took on. The Fleet Week Air Show is a very well structured air show, and the air boss, has it timed down to the second pretty much. So we could have taken off and gone straight into the show. But to allow for contingencies, we took off about a half hour early and held out over near the Farallon Islands, waiting for our time. That gave us a chance to get the run in figured out so we could hit the center point right exactly on time. So we spent maybe about half an hour holding for before our time for the air show, and then we came in. It was about a 12-minute show.
Nice. I've never been to one. You would think I would have by now.
I would think so.
Yeah.
October for the weekend of the 4th, I think, or something like that. Come on up. Or maybe it's the following weekend, the 10th, maybe something like that.
I do need to. So you have worked for United for this long, and it's time to retire because the retirement age, or because you're pretty much done flying?
Well, neither really. When I started, United had their maintenance facility. When I first got hired, maintenance was all done in San Francisco and Oakland airports.
Mhm.
And if that was still the case, I'd still be there flying. But
Oh,
by the time I left, I counted 25 different locations where we routinely went to fly airplanes because we had outside vendors that did the maintenance, heavy maintenance on the airplanes, or line stations that did a lot of the maintenance in San Francisco and Oakland. Well, Oakland does none anymore. We closed down that hangar. San Francisco does line maintenance, but they don't do any heavy maintenance anymore. So it basically meant traveling every time we went to fly, and as often as not, traveling meant going to Hong Kong or Rio de Janeiro or someplace like that, which sounds like fun, and it was. But it wasn't like we got to go there and hang out for Mardi Gras or something. It was we had to go
yeah.
to work, and which also meant sitting on airplanes for many hours to get to where we were going to work for a flight that took 2 hours. And, so it was I didn't retire because I didn't want to fly anymore, and I didn't retire because I had to. I just retired because at some point my time was more valuable to me
Yes.
than my paycheck was for spending 5 or 6 days on the road for one or two flights,
Hmm.
and it was time.
But
And so
wait,
and it wasn't, and I get to fly. I've got my airplanes in the hangar.
yeah, we're looking at your T-34 there. In fact,
Yeah,
you would commute to the Bay Area with your airplane when you were
yeah.
scheduled to fly, huh?
It's about that airplane that you see in the background. There is about a 45-minute flight to San Carlos Airport, which is where I keep the airplane when I'm in the Bay Area.
Uh-huh.
And when I was working, I just kept a car down there, and it was a 15-minute drive to the parking lot at the
Oh,
maintenance base or at the terminal.
well, that's pretty cool when you can say you fly. And you live in one of them communities that's an airport community, so you have a hangar which is part of your house.
Yeah, and the hangar is part of the house. I've got my neighbor right across the taxiway is a pilot, an active line pilot at United. He flies to work every week in his RV6.
Oh, nice. Well, you did pretty good for yourself, Joe.
Yeah, well, thanks.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. And
I
and
was I was I was fortunate. I never actually had to work for a living. I just got to fly
you
airplanes.
did what you loved, and at an early age, you knew what you wanted to do, and you focused on that, and didn't let any distractions enter your life, and got to fly the Eagle, ton of F-16. Let me see here. We have the F-15, the 747, the 777. You flew the 767 too, didn't you?
767, yeah, quite a bit. Is one of
Yeah,
the
all
main.
Boeing, 27, 37, 57. The A7, F, but
Yeah,
here's
some of the
one.
ones.
You sent me a photograph of a T-29, Convair T-29.
That was a program I was involved in when I was on the staff at the test pilot school at Edwards. And the
Mhm.
T-29 it was also an in-flight simulator, and it could simulate. That was used a lot for training shuttle astronauts because it was
Wow,
a big plane, so it had a cockpit that could be. I wouldn't say it was like the space shuttle, but it was more
hard to
representative
imagine.
of a big airplane cockpit.
Hmm.
But it was like the F-16 and like the uh, F-16 Vista, and before it, the Calspan, the company that ran those things, had a Learjet that was variable stability and a T-33 that was variable stability, and the T-29 was the same thing. And so that's what that program was. But they kind of ran out of programs to use the variable stability feature. So we
Hmm.
were developing it as a systems trainer for the test pilot school. We put an F-16 radar, I think it was APG-66 radar in it, with control stations in the cabin, so the flight test engineers could could be trained in the airplane while we were flying, and use the airplane as basically a flying test bed.
That used
Yeah,
to be a navigator trainer over at Mather, and I can remember
yeah,
being a little boy watching those. Um, yeah, very. I mean, you've a lot of airframes. And while we're talking, I'm putting up photographs of these aircraft that you provided,
Did,
so our
did I send you a
audience is
picture?
seeing. Yeah, they're
Did I
seeing
send
the
you a
good.
picture? Did I
Yeah.
send you a picture of the Goodyear blimp? That was a more unusual one of the
No,
more
you did
unusual
not.
ones I
I
got to
could get.
fly.
I'll get one, but you flew a Goodyear blimp as well.
Yeah, yeah. It was part of the test pilot school curriculum is what they call the qual phase, qualitative evaluation. So it's part of the flying qualities phase.
Hmm.
And it's an opportunity to fly a variety of different airplanes, just one-time flights typically.
Okay.
And among those that I got a chance to fly was the Goodyear blimp, so, which is It's unique among airplanes I've flown for sure.
Did you go inverted?
No, well, I thought it was funny you mentioned that because it's the only airplane I've ever flown that has no attitude indicator. You can fly an IFR without an attitude indicator. You know why? You don't, and let's put it this way: no pitch indicator, because no roll indicator, because you have no control over roll. You're just hanging from the bottom of that gondola, or in the gondola from the bottom of the envelope, and you can't really control the roll angle of the airplane. You can push on the rudders and make it turn, but it just kind of swings out and does whatever it wants to do.
Did you have to go to where it was, or did it come to Edwards?
We went to Long Beach is where it was based, and they may still be based in there. Yeah.
Did you ever have an opportunity to fly the T-33?
I did, yeah. We had a couple of times. I flew it with the Canadian Forces. They had a T-33 they brought up for their qual program, and actually got to fly that a few times because I think at the time I was on the staff. I even have a plaque someplace up here. The T-33 folks gave me from Canada because they came up and brought the airplane up to do quals with the students. And then CalSpan had, as I mentioned, a T-33 that was modified for variable stability training. Wow. So it kind of replicated the fighter before Vista came along, replicated a fighter type airplane for variable stability evaluations and training.
Yeah, that looks like a fun airplane to fly. Even for
it was. I'll put it kindly, it was not overpowered. And of course, I came along during a time when airplanes I flew had lots of power and lots of thrust, but T-33 was, it was a pretty good trainer though.
Yeah. If you were just a multi-billionaire and you could pick one aircraft that you've flown in your past and you could own it, which airframe would that be? Maybe you've never thought in those terms, but
it's hard to say because there's so many only way. Well, let me rephrase your question a little bit and I'll give you an answer. That someone said tomorrow's the very last day you ever get to fly an airplane. What airplane that you've flown in the past would you fly again? And I would pick the F4 Phantom. I give you a picture of it there. There's a picture of me the last time I flew it with a guy you might have heard of. Was one not too far from you. He lived up not too far from you. His name was Chuck Yeager.
That's a good segue. Tell me about that.
First person to ever exceed the speed of sound, October 14th, 1947. Bell X-1. So my last flight in the F4 was with Yeager, and I was an instructor pilot at Edwards, and I was the only instructor around that day. And Yeager came down, and we got to fly around for a couple hours. And it was a lot of fun. But the reason I picked the F4, I got to fly, it was an airplane that wasn't the fastest, it wasn't the most maneuverable, it wasn't the most anything. But of the planes I've flown, it was one that I got a lot of time in, a couple thousand hours. And when you master the airplane, you're endeared to that airplane. You're one in the machine. And if you talk to a lot of airline pilots, they have the same sentiment towards the 727, which is not the fastest, the biggest or anything, but 727 pilots, if you go back into the into the 70s and 80s, were in love with their airplane, and the F4 was to me was kind of the military equivalent of the airplane. Definitely was not as exhilarating and fun as some of the newer, faster airplanes, but there was just something very endearing about that airplane once you mastered the airplane. My favorite always, I think my all-time favorite was we get, have them schedule us with an A7, an A37, T-38, and an F4 when we had those 4 airplanes out there, all for proficiency flights at the same time, and then have a 1v1, V1v1 dogfight with 4 different types of airplanes.
Oh my God.
I used to do a lot of air refueling because some of the test points required that we'd be up for a long time, and it was a lot more efficient to air refuel than to come back and land and refuel. So I remember one in particular, I was in an F-16 up at 30,000 feet waiting for the tanker, and the tanker was delayed on the ground. And my friend Narco was flying the tanker, so I was talking to him on the radio and said, we got a problem with this. We're working on it. We'll get airborne. And I was getting kind of low on fuel. I was getting real low on fuel. But I was 30,000 feet right over the base. And at Edwards, I knew all I had to do was pull the power back and land. It was no big deal, but I was a little anxious waiting for the tanker because I really wanted to keep the test mission going, and I needed to get fuel. If I was going to do any more, I needed to get fuel. So they finally got the tanker going. I'm at 30,000 feet. I pointed at the ground. The tanker's on takeoff roll. I joined up with the tanker about midfield, just as they got airborne.
That's cool.
He gets the gear up, gets the boom down, and I was taking fuel off the tanker before we got to the end of the runway at Edwards.
That's nuts.
The boom operator was a friend of mine too. He ended up going to Boeing. He's the Boeing test boom operator. I stayed in touch with him. And those guys were good. They were real proficient in operating the boom on those airplanes.
Yeah. Say thanks to the people that watched this. Hope you had a good time listening, learning, and admire what Joe has done. And for those of you out there, just as he planned out his path as he started becoming a nice young man going to school, that's what awaits you with that same type of fortitude and planning. So thank you again for joining us. And we'll see you on the next episode of the Flying Dutchman podcast.